As a visionary, we do see the hopes of the future. Here's the thing, Tandag City has a lot of it. Do you know that Tandag has a perfect C-shaped beach? Do you know that we could actually turn the Linungao Tandag Island to a world-class tourist destination? Well, my name is John Marpidayo, an architecture student from the University of Science and Technology of Southern Philippines, presenting to you Tamda, Twin Linungao Revitalization. It is vital for the city to have a development key towards balance biodiversity. And Udano, we all know that the current stigma with regards to urbanization is getting worse due to a primitive or typical way of living, in such a way that buildings are predominantly behaved and compromising the ecological aspect. The proposed project is situated in the city of Tandag, Surigao del Sur, particularly between of Linungao Lantay Islands. The significance of this project proposal is to redefine the act of regeneration of Hendrix 2014 in the aspect of architecture through the application of Eco-Park design, in particular to the area of slums in the said location. As just been stated, the problem that leads the researcher to pursue this endeavor is to eradicate informal settlers within Linungao area and to present a master plan introducing recreation and leisure parks as envisioned to boost its maximum potential as an avenue for city ecotourism, not just for local but also for the national and foreign tourists. The most important part of this proposal is to create an image that advocates and promotes balanced ecology, preservation, and conservation of protected natural habitat. Therefore, the goal is for the researcher to introduce a redefined regeneration architecture. Okay, let's get started with our conceptual board. So, I do not have to state it very detailed, but in general, the design concept is stated as this: an expo structure and site compromising an eco-cultural ambience, technologically advanced building system, and mixed-use facilities and amenities, conceptualizing Tandag regionalism that provides an optimum application of design principles consisting in efficient planning with ease access encapsulated towards a one-of-a-kind eco-park and tourism center, that is Tamda. Okay, the researcher actually has these three major design objectives. It is divided into three parts: as tied, the plan, and the design. We will actually see later if all of these three are being applied as we go along. Or is it the design philosophy? And this portion here we have the design considerations. It is subdivided into three parts. Of course, it has been reflected through our design objectives. The first part to the second part to the third part, differentiated from the site to the plan and to the design. Okay, I'm not stating anymore, but a lot of things has to consider. And then the history of Tandag, why Tamda ang atong title sa atong thesis, and then the sort of history coming from that name. And then let's proceed for the design solution. Okay, so it's all about revitalization now. This site as the focus of our project, and that is to, as a researcher, we have to consider bigger things and small things, and that is to subdivide into two parts, and that is macro design solution and then a micro design solution. So in this part, we have to get in first into a macro design solution, and that is in part of the thesis. It's not in the scope of limitation, but it is in a conceptual plan. So as I get started, we have to consider that we have a lot of philosophies that we come to know, and then a lot of planning strategies that a lot of philosophers and architects have always been applied to the design. So muna siya ang
atong inspiration from how we get to uh, make our big plans into a very synchronized and very well planned city. So in this case of Tandag, our current situation, we have the growth center, and then the proposed general or GLUP of Tandag. He actually visioned that Tamda will be divided into three districts, and the two parts of that city will be named the Buena Vista Satellite Center, and the other is San Isidro Satellite Center. With that, as a researcher, because our major problem kasi is to consider our informal settlers of the site. Let's get started. Punta muna tayo dito, right? In this portion here, no, this portion here, sorry, we actually have we've seen lately, we actually have the informal settlers, the current situation, and that is our main goal, the first goal, to eradicate the informal settlers and to relocate them into a better world. And we actually have to make use of this site. Okay, so let's proceed to. Of course, it's just too easy to digest all of this because it is too detailed. So the tactics of the researchers is to provide a design, or shall we say an optimum design for them, or a model for them to be able to feel that they get to, to feel even more, the feasibility aspects of that part in terms of social acceptance, just to give them like hope for the future. Kasi iba talaga to live in a very, very synchronized community. So, muna siya tungkol 3 sites to consider where to relocate them. And then the first site is for Buena Vista, Tandag. The second is San Isidro. And then the third one is, of course, sa Barangay Rosario, sa nearby the site itself. So, kaning tulo ka satellite nato is, of course, divided into 3 kinds of livelihood or typology of living. The first side is more on fishing livelihood, and the second side is more on farming, and the third side more on urban livelihoods. So these are actually more on the strategic design solution that we give them, we to have to provide to them, and that is to. Therefore, we have this term decentralization as a common public sector reform in developing countries. This is actually our main goal, to decentralize these informal settlers and to put in a better place and in a suitable place. Okay, so this is our macro design solution, is to not just to regenerate the site, the scope site, but of course the neighboring side of it, because the effect of that macro site to its site itself is, it really matters. It really matters. So first off, we have to visualize that there should be a good planning to that small city. Shall we say it's a small city or part of the city? And then, of course, our main goal is to revitalize the site, and that is we have four main main aims for being able to revitalize it. We have the preservation, the protection, the beautification, and conservation of the Twin Linungao. Okay, as a researcher, we have this what we call termed as a regeneration. Regeneration is a green architecture movement of how to regenerate site. This is actually for this is proposal coming from Richard Hundreds from 2014, but the main goal of the researcher is to redefine the act of regeneration in the aspect of applying its concept towards my the towards the researcher's chosen site. Okay, so Linungao Lantide Islands is actually is a natural ocean wave breakers. You So we have this envision of why not putting all of these fruit bearing trees, not just fruit bearing but very native fruit bearing trees all throughout the city, to give them a policy that every block will have this kind of ratio that fruit tree is being considered. So maybe in the future, okay, you just have to read this part here, but the future it's our site, so we will have it more later on symbolism. So this is the history. I'm so excited about that. So okay, for our macro solution, we have here the regeneration of our selected site, that part of where the Linungao Lantide Islands is being connected. This is the history, and then currently it has a clutter, zoning of this, like commercials, putting of residentials and etc. But to wrap it up in a very good way of zoning, this is the best plan that we could actually offer to them. The views and vistas are being considered. So we have the central business district is being zoned into proper area, and then actually the portion here, here, and then here, then here. This is actually identified into coastal hotels, residentials for tourists, and then the center part is our commercials for everything about crime. Commercials, and then we have their existing school, existing park, LGU, and so on. We have to consider the nodes, path, and edges. We have the consideration on the complexity of crime and the physical environment. Of course, that one big thing that we have to consider. Okay, let's proceed to our urban security and perspective. So one question that really hit the researcher is how to get to into more in the security aspect of that city, and my solution to that is to have its good access towards our national security, national police, good access to our securities, and then the footage of CCTVs, and then the security measures of the area. Then urban management plan of Tamda solid waste for city sustainability. So this is the plan and how it is being passaged from one side to the main system. Okay, so let's proceed with our site, our micro solution. This is actually our scope. This is to regenerate the site. So this is our scope of limitation. So this is the development. You could actually see the details on it. We will talk about the buildings and the structures that we need to provide later. Identify nato ang its purpose, and then why it is being placed there. Okay, and then the part of the site we have here, the beach area, and then the riverside development. So So let's proceed to our next sports. Okay, here it is site conceptualization. Concept ane actually is to the amalgamation of the cultural aspect of the Tandag and then the history of it. So before, the site is actually dwelt by the royal fort of Tandag. That's a fort there, and we get to have like inspiration coming from that structure, and this is the new face of Tandag and how it being reflected to our new design. Okay, so the emphasis of our arches that we actually came to see, you know, sub before and after of that. So this is the main arch of Tandag, the C-shaped beach, and then so that being said, the significance of the royal arches of Tandag City, Surigao del Sur. Let's proceed to our design evolution. So from the arches, we reflected it to our site, we reflected to our facades, the elevations, the perspectives of our structures. So we get to have our commonalities in terms of like the usage of materials, the usage of the forms and shapes, and that is the identity that we have to get to really have this redefinition of our concept, and that's a regrammation of the site. So these are the schematics, the processes of the design, and how it actually evolved into this. And then our site development plan to identify our structures, where it is allocated, and then its purpose. So we will actually talk later the purpose of each structure. So let's proceed to our perspectives. This is a cabin design, and then it actually can be used into retreat houses. So muna siya ang nag-come out sa atong data na spaces would have to be like this. And then the Tamda Arch. Tamda Arch is actually the highest structure of the site. Of course, as an ecotourism designer, we have to consider that structure should not be taller than the emphasized site. So our emphasized site is the island itself, so it's quite high. So our 4-story structure, this is actually a showroom of Tandag, Surigao del Sur, and to reminisce all the history of the site, and then the showcasing of our locality and identity. So the Tamda arch is actually reflected into this, the arches, no, the arches of Tandag. The Tamda arch is a reflection of the Twin Linungao. This portion here is just the subjecting 2.0. So our Tamda arch is the reflection of the Twin Linungao. It is actually have its design inspiration coming from the object, and then we get to turn that into structures. So muna siya ang reflection of our Twin Linungao. The first part of that building is revitalization. The first part of that building is to revivify that one, and then to have the reflection to the other side. So muna siya twin ang effect ana siya from the planning. Then we have the restaurant design. Okay, so commercial lang siya na part. So we can actually, because based on that data, muna siya ang results of our design. And then so socialized housing, and the kiosk universal design. This is divided into several parts of the site. And then the public toilet, and then the shower, the miniatures. And then let's proceed to the other part, to the details. Okay. Here. So for this part, we have the planting strategy, the architectural landscape design for the development for our riverside. So this is the form we got. You can actually use several planters to it. The projection of how safe it could be, and then the identification of human activity, the flora and fauna usage, and the water breakers design. So muna siya ang gawan.
Well, that's it for today. And to wrap up all, Twin Linungao is truly a world-class potential. And Tandag, as the gateway towards Surigalo's tourist spot, actually has a high hope of becoming a green city. And living in that tree is actually a paradise of life. Remember that Tamda is a good startup.